Peter Van Loing explains that beliefs and assertions are related to truth in the same way that a map is related to territory. It's the map's job to get the territory right, but if it doesn't, we don't blame the territory, we blame the map. Why is it that we attempt to map out our lives and the way we should go as Christians, but we forget God? We forget God when we're mapping out our lives, and we tend to want to blame God for that when He gives us what we deserve, when He takes us where we need to go, rather than blaming our own faulty map. When we think about our lives and when we map out our lives and the way we should live for Christ, the best way to do that is by giving our hearts to Him. In Proverbs chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, we see this idea of that you give God your whole heart. You give God your whole heart. And we can see three ways of how we give God our whole hearts. Number one, you give God your whole heart by having a heart for His word. In verses 1 and 2, it says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments, for length of days and years of life and peace will add to you." He says for us to keep it with us, to write it in our hearts, to not leave it at home. This is a father talking to a son in the same way that our Heavenly Father talks to us. And He's saying to keep these commandments, and the word teaching, it means law. So it's meant to be taking as law, not just some suggestions or good ideas, but it's a commandment, it's law to keep the commandments with us where we go. And we might think that that's hard to do or it's a lot of work, but we have the motivation to do it. Well, we find that we have a reward because we're going to get a length of years, we're going to get a length of days, we're going to get peace, meaning prosperity and health. We can only get all of that if you give God your whole heart. The second way you give God your whole heart is by having a committed heart. In verses 3 and 4, it says, "Do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, so that you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man." He uses this word kindness and truth together because together it means covenant. So you're making a covenant, you're making a commitment to keep kindness and truth with you, to make it a part of your life, to write it on your heart, so that you can't go anywhere without using it and spreading it. When we do this, God likes it. We find favor with God. That word "find," it's an imperative, meaning that it gives us even more motivation to want to keep kindness and truth with us when we know that we'll find favor with God. But only if you give God your whole heart. The third way you give God your whole heart is by trusting in His wisdom. In verses 5 and 6, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight." He says that we need to trust in God and not ourselves, because as man, as Gordon and human, I tend to want to trust what I think about certain situations and sin and things in the world. But He's telling us to trust in God and what God says about it, because God is wiser than us. He has more understanding than we do about these things. God is greater than us and sees the bigger picture. So when we acknowledge Him and acknowledge that He's where we should get our wisdom from, then He'll make our paths straight. He'll show us the way we need to go, but only if you give God your whole heart. Have you ever noticed that at church in the assembly, a lot of times in the pews, there are more women than there are men? And that women are going to counselors saying that they're the spiritual leaders of their home and not their husbands. That girls mature faster than boys do, both physically and spiritually. You notice that guys, when we're lost, we want to trust our own sense of direction and don't want to ask anyone for directions. But girls, on the other hand, they're all too happy to find direction and want to know the way to go. Could it be that there's a so-called gender gap when it comes to searching out wisdom and it comes to seeking spirituality? And the fact that we don't want to ask God for directions, but we want to trust our own sense of direction. we don't want to trust that God knows the way to go. We don't want to give our hearts to Him because we want to trust ourselves instead of Him. Well, we got to trust God, and that if we give our hearts to Him, He'll show us the way to go. So today, are you giving your whole heart to God? So I want you to sit down and take 10 minutes and just think about your everyday schedule, the 24 hours, and you sleep for 8 hours, and you go to work for 10, and you have maybe 4 hours of free time and 2 hours of eating. And just think about what you're devoting in that free time. What are you giving your heart to when you're at work and when you're in the free time? Are you giving your heart to the Word? Are you giving your heart to His service? Are you taking time to give your heart to acknowledging God and His wisdom? So do this heart, if you will, heart check, and make sure that we're giving our whole hearts to God.